Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for showing up for tonight's big program. My name is Matt Yancik. I am the founder and head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain, and welcome to the premiere episode of GMs in the Machine. I will be your humble host for this evening's festivities. And just before we kind of get into the program, I want to tell you a little bit about what I hope to do with it. I want to keep it simple. I am a game master of 35 years. I'm a teacher of a little bit over 20. And what I hope to do with GMs in the Machine is just give maybe new game masters and old game masters a glimpse into the way that other game masters work. So basically, over the next couple of hours tonight with my guest game master, we're going to sit down and design a one-shot adventure, a system agnostic one-shot adventure. And we have a little bit of an outline for what we are going to follow, but there are no real rules because I will tell you that as a teacher, and I guess as a gamer and as a person, what's really important, the only rules that are important are the rules that are important for you, the rules that enable and help you to write a great game or to create a great setting or to come up with a really cool hook for your adventure. So everything that you're about to see in the next couple of hours or so, these are simple suggestions. This is meant only as kind of a way of glimpsing and taking a look at the way that other people do stuff. By no means do I claim to be an expert in creating games. I think in many ways, as a teacher, I think it also means being a really good learner and observer. And what I hope is by bringing guest GMs on the program, I hope to actually learn a lot myself. So I had mentioned that we are following a little bit of an outline tonight as we create our one-shot adventure. And what we've come up with here are 6 basic steps that we're going to kind of go through here. So the first step that we'll be looking at here tonight is sort of figuring out the tropes and the themes behind the genre and the subgenre that we're going to sort of write about in or create in tonight. Next, we're going to take a look at the setting and the culture. And to me, as a teacher, I think that setting and culture are very much tied together. Hopefully, you will agree with me when we finish tonight. After that, we're going to take a look at building an antagonist. And notice that I did not actually say a villain there, but an antagonist. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And following those ingredients, we're going to start to put them together into a setup and a pitch, which will basically be the backbone and the spine, the basic idea of what our story is going to be. And from that, hopefully, we're going to stir it up a little bit and come up with a hook, which is going to hook our non-player characters, or I'm sorry, our player characters, into the adventure and compel them to want to actually play our game. And then we'll start to break down the 3 acts. The 3 acts of our story, and we'll talk a little bit more about why we're breaking it down into 3 acts a little bit later. So I hope we're going to have fun. I know I'm going to have fun. I know my guest game master is going to have fun. I just don't know if you are. I hope that you have some fun. If you are out there in the chat, please do feel free to speak up. We are always happy to hear your ideas. I am not the best at juggling chat and running the stream and then running like Google Docs and all of that stuff, so I might get a little bit mixed up there, but please feel free to at least try. And so, with no further ado, let's meet our guest game master for tonight. So, Mr. Kanaras, my old adversary, how are you tonight, sir?
I'm fine. I never realized we were enemies, but that's okay.
Well,
uh,
I guess we'll find out. Are you ready for tonight's festivities?
I am. I'm very excited, and you did a great job introducing the whole what we're gonna do tonight, which is great. But really, this comes down to GMing, which is basically storytelling and being able to provide this framework for the players and the world to play in and let them create something that hopefully is memorable, emotional, and like you said, fun. And
Yeah.
that's really, I love making adventures. I've been doing it, long before I started role playing. I would have my action figures and in a living room and create the setting of whatever I was playing in, that 6-year-old me, creating stories. And really it now 40 something years later, it's all of the same piece, and the fun and the adventure is still there because it's a bunch of characters having to do interesting things in interesting places.
Yeah,
So
I think that's the interesting thing like about it is that sometimes I look around and I think about the idea that we're a bunch of 40 something adults that are sort of playing make believe, and I think it really says something though about how much fun it really is, and I think it says a lot about how storytelling, like basic storytelling and interactive storytelling
mhm.
like we do in a role-playing game, can really like it can connect, it can resonate with people. um so I know, Steve, here are some of the rules, if you can say we set up rules beforehand. But we had basically said that we were going to. Steve and I got together maybe a week or so ago, and we were talking about what we were going to do for this stream and what our idea was going to be. And we were throwing around. We started with like genres and throwing around just the very basics of maybe theme and genre and subgenre. And Steve, do you want to tell them a little bit about what we came up with?
Sure. So as you mentioned before, this is system agnostic, so we didn't want to play in anybody's universe or rule set, and figure that any game can work, in a lot of different genres and settings. And so what we came up with was, we wanted to not stay away from, but kind of do a little twist on fantasy, and not our own. Obviously, it's a very very well worn tradition, but we settled on sword and sorcery, which, for anybody watching that's not familiar with the differences, you know, fantasy generally is your Tolkien's, the stuff that has multiple different races and the Dark Lord and the big epic battles and that sort of thing.
Right.
Whereas sword and sorcery is more your, probably the stereotypical one is your Conan,
Yeah.
the one guy in a crazy world that certainly has monsters and a lot of the tropes of fantasy,
Yeah.
but he's not going to the kingdom of the elves. It's a little grittier. It's humans in kind of the pre to early civilization eras,
Mm.
where there's in one city is different from another, and they're all praying to different gods, and they're you know doing different things and caravans and all that kind of stuff. And it's not just Conan, but it's that sort of stuff. The other one that comes to mind is Fafford and the Gray Mouse, or
Yes.
the Fritz Lieber stuff, where
Hmm.
it's a lot of drinking, it's a lot of carousing, it's a lot of thieves and assassins and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit darker than your you know dwarves and elves fighting goblins kind of thing.
Right. And what's interesting though about that is, so we had talked about sword and sorcery, and the first thing I think that pops into anyone's head is Conan the
Mhm.
Barbarian, of course, because I think he's probably the most mainstream and most accessible, at least on this side of the Atlantic, hero. And of course, the Grey Mouser, I believe, is probably a lot more popular over in Europe. But at any rate, when you say darker, uh, I like the fact that you say darker because who was it? Who, I don't remember, but when did we start talking about like a noir or like a we had originally said we wanted to do like a heist or a crime thing, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I think that's what got my mind sort of ticking and thinking about the idea of not just doing something that was a crime heist, but doing something that was very specifically hard-boiled, Raymond Chandler-esque noir, or Elmore Leonard noir. And I don't know if I may have bitten off more than I know I can chew by doing this, but I think that just the very fact that you mention the darkness of sword and sorcery, that gives me some hope that we can kind of unite it with with hard-boiled detective LA Confidential style noir. So we'll see. Um, So we're already kind of talking a little bit about our genre and subgenre. So just to let everybody know, I've sort of explained the 6 steps that we're going to go through tonight, but I haven't really explained the format here. So tonight we're going very Zoom old school here. We're going very stream old school. So all I'm doing is we're going to be 2 talking heads for the night with basically a screen capture of a Google Doc that Steve and I are sharing together, okay? And so we're going to scroll through each one of these 6 steps, and we're going to be punching in information, writing in our ideas, spitballing stuff, throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks, and hopefully as we go through this process, when we emerge on the other side, we're going to have something roughly usable as a one-shot adventure, and hopefully it's going to take less than 2 hours because we're already 15 minutes into it, but we'll find out. So what I'm going to do now is I am literally going to scroll us up into part 1, which is our genre and subgenre examples here. And the reason why I figured we should sort of start with something like this is simply because I thought it would be a really good idea to, well, I got to be honest, good artists create and great artists steal, as they say. And I think that one of the really important things, at least from my end of things, and I don't know how you do it, Steve, but before I run any game, I immerse myself in that world and I think long and hard about what it's like to be there. And I'll watch movies, I'll listen to music. So, what I've done here is I've basically set up our genre and our subgenre. So, our genre is going to be the overarching sort of themes and tropes and ideas. And in case anyone at home maybe has like a question about what that is, genre is basically it's a stylistic or thematic category, right? It's based on similarities either in the narrative elements, aesthetic approach, or emotional responses from any particular genre. Now, the idea here is that we're going to try to elicit feelings and ideas from these different tropes and examples that we use. So, Steve, do you want to kind of get
Yeah.
us started here with like the genre and what you think? So, I see your cursor is right there on the first line.
It is.
Um, give us some tropes and exam. I mean, maybe it might even be better to start with examples and then draw tropes from them. But
So you mean examples from other sources of literature and stuff, or
yeah, literature or
yeah. So
film, television, comics.
sure. Yeah. So I mean, we've already mentioned, the Conan stuff and
Hmm.
the Fritz Lieber stuff. Other sword and sorcery things.
Well, I think
I
Conan's. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, Conan is the like the stereotypical one, and
I
Robert
think
E. Howard.
I'm happy to start there if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So you want me to type in
Yeah.
Conan?
Yeah.
Okay. And so some of the stuff that, a lot of people know Conan through the Schwarzenegger movies and things, but there's really hundreds at this point of comics, books, novels, movies, a couple television shows over the years. And they all have a little bit of a different take, but I think the originals, the
Yeah.
Robert E. Howard stuff is well, for lack of a better, it's macho, of course,
Right.
but he's writing in the 30s, and it's very much and I think part of the draw of it is this is a man and his sword and his wits and his strength,
Mm.
up against everything that the world could possibly throw at him.
Yeah.
And he's looking for uh, adventure, but he's also a thief. He's he loves his women.
Mm.
He wants to get rich, and then he also, Robert E. Howard wrote Conan over. He wrote his whole lifetime,
Yeah.
not in chronological order, but this is a guy who starts as a Sumerian tribesman and ends up as the king of Rome, basically Aquilonia.
Yeah.
So it encompasses a lot. And
So
go ahead.
I'm listening to what you're saying here, and it sounds like what you mean is, and a way of sort of bringing this, updating this, and bringing this into our own
Mhm.
contemporary time. Like you're saying that he loves adventure. You said in this particular case he loves women, but really that comes down to pleasure. I
Yeah.
assume is what it means, an indulgence. So we can translate something like that from the tropes and the stereotypes of like the 30s into something more updated, which just means like a person that indulges themselves.
Right.
So it sounds like what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to scoot Steve and I on, unless Steve, do you want to type for us or?
I can do the typing. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry guys. So what's happening is that the Zoom layout is on top of it. So if I start typing into Google Docs, our beautiful, pretty faces are going to disappear, and then you'll all be sad. But maybe I think what we're looking for as far as tropes go is maybe like, life by the sword. It sounds like what you said, a life of pleasure and indulgence, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, and it sounds like what you're also describing is a very simple sort of nomadic life. Um, so I think this is maybe a good way or a good place to kind of start as far as like what the themes and what the feelings are going to be. Um, do we think that is there another one? I know that you're going to mention another source.
Well, I was going to mention another Robert E. Howard, which is not quite as famous, but still fairly famous, which is Solomon Kane.
Hmm.
And different time period. This is talking in 16th century Europe, and Solomon Kane is a Puritan, um, of not in America, but in England.
Mm.
And he more or less does the same things. He goes to exotic locales. He's been to Africa. He's been to Russia fighting sorcerers, and but basically the same sort of thing. Not obviously the pleasure driven, because
Right.
he's got the puritanical, bent, but it's the same sort of thing. He goes on his own with a sword and some flintlock
Mm.
pistols, or whatever they were at the time. Uh, you know, confronting witch doctors, confronting you know dark magicians, werewolves. I think he did a spell in the Black Forest of Germany. So the same kind of thing. Just that, like you mentioned before, the life by the sword,
Yeah.
nomadic. You know, so just in a different setting. And I
Right.
and I think that I think it can properly be called sword and sorcery, because again, the stuff is still there,
Yeah. There's the
but it doesn't.
thematic kind of feel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for Solomon Kane, then the thing that I noticed that you mentioned that was different was just the fact that he's travel. I mean, it's nomadic, but in the time of Solomon Kane, there's a lot more kind of like continent hopping and movement, perhaps. But I think that that nomadic kind of life of adventure is definitely like a common theme that
Sure.
we're kind of picking up on.
Nope,
Um,
I agree.
so then with that, if we have the travel and we have kind of like it sounds like the character is sort of indulging himself as far as like his pursuits and what he's hunting goes. So I guess the indulgence is
Hmm.
also a part of it.
Sure.
But sort of now we have to sort of move on to though to and I'm thinking about and considering like the way that we're gonna integrate crime into this, but we'll hold off on that for just a moment and just sort of talk though about possibilities within the crime subgenre. So I had mentioned some stuff, but it's not really about me tonight. I kind of want to know what you're thinking, Steve. Are there any examples of like noir, hard-boiled detective stuff from whether it be from movies, television, comics, or whatever that you were kind of interested in?
Well, sure. One of my favorite movies of all time is Chinatown, the
Mm.
with the young Jack Nicholson
Jake
and
Gittes.
Jake Gittes. That kind of stuff. And then one that I'm sure you're very familiar with, Sin City.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
Frank Miller. Just I'll call it noir on steroids.
yes.
But just ultra violent. And I think what we can say about noir, as opposed to just, I mean, crime can encompass things like, CSI,
Mm.
which is like procedural, but noir is much more seedy underbelly of
Yes.
society. And
Yes.
like things are, there's no there, even though it's called noir, which is black, and
Right.
Sin City was stark black and white. Noir is shades of gray when it comes to morality, and it's
Yeah.
it's you know probably skews to the more dark gray. But
And but what I often see with that is I think about the idea of things being in the darkness, but then a light is kind of shined on them, and all the little cockroaches come out and they spread. And I feel like that's very much the seedy, hard-boiled crime noir kind of feel is. And I
mhm.
think we were talking about this before the stream too. Is like the stuff that, like when you find the rock on the beach and you pick it up and you turn it over, is all the squiggly things on the bottom. And I feel like noir is a sort of about that. So with Sin City, what would you say then, Steve, are the tropes of that you can draw from Sin City?
Well, I think Sin City is definitely about inverting society, and not to get into the weeds of every story, but the prostitutes are more likely to be the heroes than the cops or
Right.
the cardinals, or
Yeah.
so like everything, like whatever social structure is inverted,
Stereotypes
the
are flipped on their head. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that noir has a lot of that, where the people who should be the beacon on the hill are really the slime. And
Right.
yeah.
Right. Oh, I like that. So Sin City what are we going to say? Inverted society, stereotypes,
Yeah.
I don't know how to phrase that, but
Yeah, we'll call it stereotypes inverted, or morally inverted. Um, just type that in there, and then I guess society values flipped, or something like
mm,
that. And I think I think that's typical of noir. And there's also, just as a genre trope, surprise. Like there's um, a lot of things that you don't necessarily expect
right.
get revealed as the stories go along,
Right.
and they're shocking. They're shocking.
Okay, so I think we've got, and actually, what's weird is I think these go together more than I had originally thought. I think I panicked a little bit because I was thinking basically like I was like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to make these things work? And they're gonna hunt us down and be upset for what we've haven't fulfilled or haven't done here. How do you think we would take these two things and like mash them? I've got ideas, but again, this is not about me. This is about you, Steve. We're building a game for you to use. How would you mash them together? Hard-boiled
Well,
sword and sorcery noir.
so I think, jumping into the kind of the lone wolf, and in this case the party, because
Mm,
obviously role playing games are social, and there's going to be more than one PC. But you know throwing the kind of rugged individualist, pleasure seeking type into this crime ridden, uh dark underbelly world, gives kind of like what you said before about shining that light. I
right.
mean, the PCs can be the light, and they'll probably be horrified by what
Yeah.
they find when the light gets flipped on. And then they have to decide: do I become part of this world to get rich, or do I set a fusion block and destroy it.
Right. So I
Yeah.
think we're hopping already into like our maybe like our make or break kind of moment. Like I like this idea. How are we going to entwine these? What would we say then? How would you say it, Steve? If you're going to say we're inventing this new genre where we're mashing these two things together, what's the spin that we're putting on your genre, your games genre?
Well, I would say, the small town village meets the big city,
Mm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than like the general noir theme is the hero is, he knows all the hideouts, he knows, who everybody is because he's a part of that city.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the sword and sorcery is, hey, the barbarian just came to town,
Right.
you know?
Right. And so would this be something along the lines of like the barbarian from the smaller city comes into the big city and is the one that's
Yeah.
illuminating the darkness, and in this way the one that's kind of like with his simpler Conan-esque way of thinking of things, like actually illuminates the things that are very obvious for that maybe everyone else has gotten into a routine about sort of like just sort of taking for granted then maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that works.
How would we write that down, Steve? What would we
Well,
say?
uh, let's see. Let's just call it the 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 villagers bring their energy and innocence to the dark city or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that, it's not polished English here, but that's the
It's not
sense.
polished English, but it is English, and
It is English.
that's
It is
all that
English.
we want on the holidays, Steve. So I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that would be that's good. So we're thinking like maybe the kind of gruff, simple Conan-esque sort of simple nomadic wanderer. Maybe it's their first time in the city. I don't know.
Mhm.
They bring this sort of like wisdom to, or maybe this illuminating kind of insight to the story. Um, okay, cool. I like that. So I think let's sort of hop along here to our next idea. So after genre and sub-genre, what we want to actually work on, or at least the thing that I had figured we would work on next, is the actual setting and culture. So the culture here is, I think, one of the keys, at least as far as when I develop. And again, I do not want to tell anyone how to build your games, but I'm an English teacher and an elementary school teacher, and I tend to just grab things that I know very well and I use them as a game master. And so one of the things that I know very well, at least from teaching social studies, history, are basically culture. And every culture has 7 aspects to it, but culture is basically the social behavior and the norms that we find in societies. It's the knowledge, the beliefs, the arts, and the literature, the laws, the customs, the capabilities, the habits of individuals in different groups. So let's talk a little bit about our setting. So we have a little bit of our theme here, but let's talk and go a little bit deeper on our setting here. So as I kind of said when we started off the stream, um, no one has to go in any order that they don't want to go in, and no one has to use anything that they don't want to use. One of the things that I often do when I'm creating is I start with like just a very simple template or a block for my city, my village, my town, or whatever it happens to be. I come up with a quick name, come up with a population, a rough size, an affiliation, which basically just means like are they beholden to anyone? Are they part of a state or an empire? Are they out on the frontier? Are they an island unto themselves. And then a reputation. And the reputation, of course, is just simply how that town, city, or village is spoken of in maybe in the bars at 2 o'clock in the morning when no one will go home and they're talking about that town, city, or village. What do people say? Um, I usually go with that first, only to give us like a rough idea of where to start. So, Steve, I know that that's probably a lot to throw at you, but I'm going to go take a break and you just start filling in blanks. Any ideas, Steve? It's up to you.
Yeah. So let's talk about the city, I guess.
Cool.
So, and this is probably insight into the way that I do GM.
Please. Please.
So whatever I'm reading at the time
Hmm.
creeps its way into the story that I'm building at the time.
Really?
So yeah, absolutely. And I think, you and I think you were the player in one of the games that I did, where the science fiction game where we went to it was basically pirated from the Frederick Pohl novel.
No, you
Yeah, of course it was.
stole from Frederick
Absolutely.
Pohl? That was not
Absolutely
your.
I
Okay.
did.
Hmm.
So just to, insight into what I'm reading right now, I'm reading about ancient Babylon and I'm reading the Iliad.
Hmm.
So here's where I'm kind of pirating, Sumerian culture, which we know a lot about, but not a lot about. Mesopotamia,
Hmm.
Birthplace of civilization. So this is where you have,
Ooh, interesting.
you know, 3,000-4,000 years BC.
Yeah.
You have basically Neolithic tribes,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden you have civilization. You have cities. You have ziggurats. You have,
Mm.
um, I mean, you've had agriculture for a while, but you have more, um, you know, what do you call it? Irrigation
Mm-hmm. That's right.
systems. You have,
Yes. Yes.
you've got
Yep.
something where now it's not just, tiny villages, subsistence.
Right.
It's and what does that bring? That brings art. That brings
Yeah.
culture. That
Man is
brings
shaping their environment.
it brings law. It
Mm.
bring because law as in codified law, as opposed to, the law of the tribe.
Mm.
Things like that. So what I'm thinking, going on the themes that we set up in the genres, is this is the city that exists, but everything around it is still in that. I don't want to say, like, because I don't want to put it in the time frame of
Right.
Neolithic,
I get it.
but think of Rome and then the barbarian tribes. The Visigoths were not. They call them barbarians because the Romans were jerks,
Right.
but they weren't barbarians. They still,
Yes.
they had metal,
Yes.
they had writing, they had everything.
Yes.
They just were different. So that's what we have here. This kind of this haughty, um, you know, city structure.
This goes
And
really well with the idea of basically of sword and sorcery mixed with the noir part of it, because there's this sort of sense of indulgence that I'm getting out of the city, like a city that has gotten like kind of tipped so far in a civilized direction that it has become indulgent.
right.
Perhaps I don't know. Again, I don't want to say anything, but that's the feeling I'm getting from what you're describing.
Yeah, I think that goes along with what I was thinking. And so, as far as filling in these categories here, naming is
Yeah,
always tough.
yeah. Don't
That's
even worry.
always the tough
Yeah, I
part.
usually go with
But
the name is like the last thing that I develop.
yeah, and as far as population goes, I'm thinking, for something that we would consider a maybe medieval to post-medieval place, I think even a city of 50,000,
That would
population of
be,
fifty
yeah,
thousand
yeah,
would be quite a bit,
yeah.
for that time period.
But
Um,
within the realm, and plus,
yeah,
it's just it's all make believe, so
it's all make
that
believe and it's
works.
a made up number, but I think that works. And then as far as affiliation, I kind of like the idea of city states. Always
Okay.
have, where, there might be a greater kingdom out there, or, maybe the city state is part of a larger whole with an emperor, but
Mm,
but it's governed. It's its own polis, as they call it.
Right.
In ancient Greeks, yeah, they were the quote unquote Achaeans, and they mounted an adventure to Troy, the Greeks versus the Trojans, but they were each one had their own king. Each city, Thebes and Corinth and Sparta and Athens, they each had their own king. So I think this city that we're talking about is its own entity.
Is it the most powerful in the region then? Because if we're sitting at a population of around 50,000, then it's most likely it's
I'd say it's definitely the most powerful within its wingspan,
hmm.
certainly. And there might be a couple of other smaller towns and certainly a bunch of tiny villages around it, but it definitely is the powerhouse.
So as far as affiliation goes, we're looking at like a city-state with a rough kind of arrangement with the surrounding
Yeah,
city-states, and you would imagine from this, what's interesting to me is that automatically in my head, what pops in is there's politics going on between different governances, and like there's little things happening and trade going on and trade being leveraged and all of that stuff already. So
sure. And I think, the way I envision it is that, the villages in the surrounding countryside are the breadbasket for the city, and the city is where the wealth is.
right.
And so, basically the villagers tolerate the city and their crap because they get money from it, and the city needs the villages to feed itself.
Right. Okay.
You know,
Sounds
so
sounds good. So if we're going with the city state format, how about the reputation now of that city state? What are we thinking?
I think it's seen as a very powerful place.
Hmm.
Um, certainly it could raise an army, if it needed to. Um, it's rich, it's wealthy,
Yeah.
it's got everything.
Yeah.
It has the art, it has the culture, it has so in a way it's an admirable place.
Right.
But
On
it's
the
also
surface.
on the surface, but it's an arrogant place.
Yes.
You know, yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's punch it
Okay.
in there. I like it.
So, what was the word you just used? It is powerful. There
You
was a
said
word that you used
arrogant.
that I said arrogant, and there was something you said before that I really liked. You
Oh,
said admirable, powerful,
admirable.
admirable
On the surface.
on the surface.
Cool.
It's arrogant, and I would even go so far as to say cruel. In the
Mm,
way that it treats the villages.
yeah.
You
I
know,
like that from a GM in the machine standpoint, not necessarily
yeah.
from a life standpoint. From a GM in the machine standpoint, I'm like, oh, I'm all about that. That sounds cool. Sounds like great for storytelling. Um, okay. So now I don't want to spend a ton of time on these, but I think that this is a really good way of kind of like setting up our the basics of what our city is. And of course, remember, we still haven't come up with a name yet, or I should say Steve still hasn't, but that's okay. Naming, like, it's I'm the same, Steve. Like, have you ever watched those movies where like people sit down and they're going to write a book? And the first thing they do is they sit down, they put their typewriter down or their laptop or whatever, and they start typing and they write the title and they underline it and it says by so and so. And then they move to the first page and they just can't think of something.
Right.
I've never been able to think of the title first. The title is like the last thing, and it changes the most, more than
Yeah,
anything
I
else.
agree.
So, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that have not taken my fourth and fifth grade social studies class, I like to break up. Actually, it's also seventh and eighth grade and high school as well. I like to break up culture into 7 aspects. Now, there's nothing new about what I'm doing here. You'll find some people that break it up into 10, some people that break it up into 5. I've settled on 7. I think that 7 aspects of culture is really a nice round number. These 7 aspects of culture define a place, define a people. And while there may be subsets within those places or those peoples, in general, um, they hold true across the spectrum. And actually, indeed, the differences that you see in the different peoples and the different places within that larger place grant that place its texture or its identity, maybe, if you will. So the 7 aspects that I often work with here are social organization, and that basically comes down to the unit of family and the unit of social strata within any society. So, for example, there may be the poor and the rich. There may be a caste system. There may be any number, a serfdom, any number of different systems. Um, Government and forms of governance, a democratic society, a republic, any whatever you happen to be thinking about. Religion, forms of faith and forms of worship. So are they a polytheistic nation or monotheistic? Are there polytheistic and monotheistic followers within the nation? Are they a nation of atheists? Faith and religion play a large part in developing and flavoring a location. And from that, what often comes from those basic things, what often comes are customs and traditions, because those customs and traditions often grow out of those 3 most basic units: the social organization, the government, and religion. Not always, but in general and basically they do. So, what sort of holidays come up? What sort of religions are tolerated? What are not tolerated? What do you do on the third Friday of the seventh month of you know of the 13th year of whatever? These are all part and parcel with um, setting the scene. Um, Next, we have economic systems, because economic systems often grow out of a group's or a society's faith, their belief in their relationships with other people, how they see themselves on the ladder of social strata. Um, Economic systems are often set up in that way. Arts and literature are often a reflection of how the individual sees themselves or sees themselves within a broader spectrum. And finally, we have language, which is kind of like a mishmash of everything. Language forms, evolves, and grows with the people and with the culture. So what I wanted to do here is basically I wanted to figure out how we felt about what each one of these things represented within the culture that we're about to create, what a hub of influence was. So, for example, if we're talking about religion, a hub of influence might be a particular type of church. It might be a stone that is worshipped somewhere in the village. It might be a waterfall where people go on the third day of the seventh month of the 13th year or whatever it is. Um, and in addition to hubs of influence, I wanted to talk a little bit about and develop an NPC of influence or import, not necessarily to the city, but to perhaps the story that we're going to tell. Um, we'll figure out which one it's going to be. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because it is so easy to make this. It's so easy to make this get on this track where we just world build the whole night, because we want to get to the next steps, which is when we start actually building the story. But Steve, let's take a look at these
Yes.
7 aspects. And I don't mean to put any pressure on you, but I'm just going to go
No.
sit in the back here for 15 minutes. I'm going to take a nap. And why don't you just start punching things into the computer and ring text me when you're done, and I'll be here, loyal and faithful as ever. Um, we don't have to go in this in any order that you don't want to go into. Does anything spring to mind? Or even if you want to say, I don't know if I want to design it this way, I want to add something, I want to subtract something, I'd rather do it a different way. What are you thinking?
So what I'm drawing on is kind of the theme of the city. And I definitely wanted to have, again, drawing from those early days of city states,
Mm,
uh, have something very well defined about this place,
mm.
and have it be influencing a lot of the different sections that we just talked about: the religion, the government, certainly the art and literature. And kind of what I'm gravitating to is kind of an animal totem for the city. Kind of like, you've seen it in literature where the place is, all about snakes, or
Yeah.
the place is all about spiders, or it's all about, something like that. And I think what I'm what I'm leaning towards is owls.
Oh,
Uh,
not a
and
court of owls, are you?
not a court of owls, but just, and this is where we'll take it in, like have their religion be, um, the cult of owls.
Cool.
They're the owl, like an owl god type of thing. Um,
I like
and
it.
then the government is sort of semi-theocratic, meaning I think that
Hmm.
there's like a town council, and it's elected, but they kind of do the bidding of the cult when the cult, they're the ones that exert the influence when they need
Yeah.
to. From a social organization, I kind of want to go a little different, because you've seen a lot of cities where it's, the nobility and the different noble houses and the noble
Hmm.
families. I want it to be more egalitarian than that. I,
Mm.
I, I want it to be where it's a meritocracy. So, an artisan could have as much influence as a banker or a
Right.
merchant, but always they have to abide by the the dictates of the religion, the cult. Like, you
Hmm.
can't defy the cult and expect to get anywhere.
Mm.
So I'll say for social organization, we'll say egalitarian to a point,
Hmm. Okay.
where nobody's getting, rich because of who their daddy was,
Right.
but
Theoretically. Yeah.
nobody's going to get rich if they cross the cult.
Right.
uh and then, let's see, what else do we have? Economic systems. um I think I think we talked about this a little bit, where they depend on the village for food, and then it's a artisan kind of society, where they have their armorers and their taverns, and all the usual city type stuff.
Right. Right.
um and let's see, arts and literature. um you know there's owl statues everywhere, and I think the owls are, symbolic. So I would say, like, the police force would have, owl symbols on their armor.
Nice. And I
you
I'm
know
sensing I'm sensing obviously if this is a cult or if there's such a weight on the shoulders of the citizenry. I mean, I'm just sensing a lot of city-state approved art and literature. Like basically, like I'm just sort of seeing it as, there's maybe there's an official department of art and literature or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to tell you stuff, but there may
no, I
be
think,
like people that come
yeah,
by and approve of what you're doing.
sure. And it's got to have the stamp
Yeah.
of approval, or you'll find yourself in some trouble.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
um so as far as NPCs go, I think certainly the head of the church, or
Just
the
just
head of,
say a name.
yeah.
You know how
Yeah, that's
David
see, that's
Morell
always the
does
hard
it?
part.
It is the hard part,
No.
but so David Morell wrote First Blood, the novel
Mhm.
which the film First Blood was based on. And for those people that don't really know, um, Rambo, the character of John Rambo, was not such a silly, stereotypical joke. in the beginning. And if you go back and you watch the first ones, and you read the very first novel, that novel was actually taught as a young adult novel in high schools all across the United States until the movie was made and until like it became this action adventure sort of story. David Morrell, who wrote First Blood, uh, the system that he uses is the alphabet. He starts at A and he names the first character something that starts with A. The next is B, C, D, E, and then he kind of bumps it
That's
around
funny.
at a certain point. So, do we want to call them the head of the church, or do we want to call them? Are we going with inquisitors, or
Yeah.
we did secretly talk about one thing, and that was the name inquisitors before the show. So this is not 100% off the cuff, but it's 99% off the cuff.
I've just done,
Taito.
and this is another, yeah, this is another trick of mine. I look up what owl what is in Greek, and Taito came up. So that's
I
the name
like
of our
it.
head inquisitor.
The head
Um,
Taito? The head Taito?
head
No?
no head inquisitor
Okay.
Taito. Like
All right. Just a
that's his given
suggestion.
name. No,
Okay.
no, that's all right. um, and then for the government, let's have, rather than the head of the council, maybe we'll have a counselor from maybe one of the weaker wards, um, who the PCs might encounter at some point, and maybe he's a little off the. I wouldn't want to say he's a traitor, but he's not quite as um, in love with
Yeah.
the Inquisitors.
So there's a little bit
Um,
of friction there.
yeah, a little bit of friction, a little bit of the underbelly that we were talking about
Sure.
before, where everything seems to be so monolithic, but it's really not. And we'll call him. Uh, and I'm just typing letters and hoping that something comes out.
Lindbeck.
Lindbeck, there you
Lindbeck.
go. Lindbeck,
There we go.
Lindbeck. I like it.
No.
Um, and let's see, customs and traditions.
Yeah, that's one we've been kind of avoiding. But
Yeah.
I think though, I mean, if this is a cult of owls, and
Mhm.
there's an inquisitor involved here, I mean, they're probably very strict about their holiday celebrations and enforcing worship, or at least
Yeah.
compliance
I was
with.
thinking the same thing. I was going to use the word ritual, and
Mm,
and maybe strict ritual observance, and even beyond that, almost a I don't want to say the word totalitarian because I think it's way too early in history to have
mm.
true totalitarianism, but
They could be ahead of
cert
the curve.
yeah,
I'm just
but like,
bad
because owls, watchers, somebody's always watching, so strict ritual observance, so
Oh,
everything has to follow along. Now go
can
ahead.
I suggest something? So,
Sure.
under religion, so I'm thinking about hubs of influence, and my original idea for hubs of influence was actually naming physical locations, right?
Hmm.
What if they worship in towers? Like owl, they climb up
I
to the
love it.
top of the towers, and they're called watchtowers, and that's where people really go to sort of worship. Oh, we've got Lauren Pino. You might have your not so secret police or cult enforcers might be named something like the Eyes of. Oh, Lauren. Lauren has an idea. He says you might have your not so secret police or cult enforcers might be named something like the Eyes of Wisdom. I kind of like this idea, like a police force that is kind of like supposed to be more neutral, maybe, and they sort of go out there and they're actually like enforcing these things, and they're supposed to be neutral and like unattached to this cult of owls, but maybe they actually are. I don't know. I'm so sorry, Steve, but
No, fair
myself
enough.
and
And
Lauren had ideas and we just threw them out.
no, I love that suggestion, because obviously, the link with Minerva, right?
Mm-hmm.
Athena.
Mm-hmm.
whose symbol is the owl and the goddess of wisdom. So I kind of like that. So as long as Lauren is okay with us stealing that idea,
Lauren,
we'll go with it.
we're sending you a non-disclosure agreement to sign when we make millions of dollars off of your idea. You'll have, some assurance, you'll rest assured, you will have contributed to the culture of our own real life, while you may not have been compensated for it. Because we're getting so rich off of all of this, Lauren. We're not. We're not at all.
And
Lauren says steal away. Lauren, I love you.
all right, excellent, beautiful.
Thank you, Lauren.
I'm going to add into economic systems. I
Sure.
think and I've always loved this. I love guilds, and I love the influence that guild leaders can have in
Hmm.
stories, because even though they're integral to the city, they're they've got their own interests to look after.
Yeah.
So since we have this artisanal kind of economic system, I think the guild leaders um, could
And
be great. And then
the guild is
add,
automatically going to have a lot of friction with the
sure,
cult because they want to protect their artisans and they want to protect their craftsmen. They want to protect their own members. But maybe they kind of grit their teeth and go along with things, at least for now, or until another
okay,
cult moves in, allows them more
yeah,
freedom.
no, I love it. So I've just created an NPC who is the leader of the Silversmiths, uh, by the name of Argent. And
Got it.
I think so. This is just throwing things out, and we
Yeah,
can
why
kind of
not? Yeah.
weave these people in as we need to once we get into the story building phase.
Mm.
Um,
All this is going to change when we start story building because then it's going to kind of have to move a little bit to suit the story,
sure,
or maybe not. Who
of
knows?
course,
We
of course.
have social organization, but we don't have NPCs of influence or import. Government is we have Lindbeck. Who is Lindbeck again? I want to make sure we get like something down for each person before we.
Sure. Lindbeck is a um, an elected counselor
Hmm.
from a from one of the weaker wards,
Okay. Right.
weaker, less influential wards.
And that's exactly why he's going to be a character in your story because he's trying to leverage more power. Maybe.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or try, if not get more power for himself, then certainly give some comeuppance to the head inquisitor or whoever else.
What if there's someone within the eyes of wisdom who's just sort of going along with things and actually disagrees with the cult of owls? And this NPC might be, for all intents and purposes and by outward appearances, be like a strong supporter. But then I don't know. I'm throwing this idea out, and that's what I
No,
was.
I love it. I think what's great about when you're story building is I tend to do this. I don't know if you do, but I tend to create far more characters than the PCs ever meet.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and I think that just as a an aside to game mastering, I think you have to be prepared
Yeah.
to pivot,
Yeah.
and you can't fall in love with the story path that you came up with because your players will not follow it, and
Yes.
and they shouldn't have to.
I know
uh
that very well.
yeah. And once you realize that, hey, it's okay if they go different places and do different things than you thought, as long as you've got something prepared for a different eventuality. So, here we are, we're, in two sentences creating five NPCs.
Right.
They may meet three of them,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
And one
Uh,
or two of them will most likely get reskinned as something else, which in a way makes
sure.
all of that effort really worth it. I mean, honestly, like truthfully. Okay, cool. So it looks like, let's see here. We've got, do we kind of have it? I'm so sorry we interrupted you when you were writing arts and literature. But go ahead, continue
Oh,
with
okay.
custom. No, no, go ahead. Continue with customs and tradition. I'm here to help you stay on track as well.
I'm just naming our police captain,
Captain,
who's a little bit on the. Yeah, we'll
Captain,
call him. We'll, hmm. I want something with eyes, perhaps.
the letter I.
No.
Captain
It's gonna.
Ocular.
That's what I was kind of thinking, but then it kind of shortens and it's Captain Occult, which is completely different. And
That's slightly different
so,
meaning, but that's why I keep
yeah,
a
right.
thesaurus
Sure.
handy. Go ahead and keep working.
We're
I'm
gonna
gonna
call him
look up.
Captain Mattis.
Sure.
Captain Mattis, because again, I draw on my Greek background, but the Greek word for eye is mati. So Captain Mattis,
I was gonna
which
say, how about the name Shivi?
Shibi.
Shivi. It's vision rearranged.
Oh, interesting. Okay, see, I like that too.
Yeah, Shivi.
Yeah,
Shivii. You were asking for a word or a name with eyes in it. Matt is
yeah, there you go.
Shivi.
Mattis
That
Shivi.
works.
I love it. All right, cool. And this is how the creative process works, folks.
I know.
And
At least in a YouTube stream for
in a
GMs.
YouTube stream. Language, I'm not going to worry too much about because I figure everybody's speaking common.
Yeah, we don't have to do each.
There's no need. Yeah, there's no need to go into there.
Wait. Stop right there, mister.
Go ahead.
Feel free to rage disconnect from me if you don't like this. What if there's a secret language among the owl cultists of hooting and bird calls?
Okay, I like
That's
it.
that's Steve being polite to me. Ladies and gentlemen,
No, I
that's
actually
like
do like it
hmm. Oh,
because it could be um, a secret language that the people don't understand,
hmm.
but when they hear people doing it, they know something's about to
They
go
get
down.
frightened. It's
Yeah,
it's the noir part at night when something is happening. They hear the
yeah,
owls calling to each other, and that's the seedy underbelly that perhaps our simple Conan the Barbarian type characters are going to shed light on, illuminate.
yeah.
Um,
No, I like it. I like
maybe,
it.
maybe. Um,
Cool.
would that manifest itself? Would that manifest itself? So the idea of the hubs of influence, and again, I don't want to tell you how to do this, but the idea is to actually create physical things, um, and then color them with what we've just colored them with. Are there signs of this at night? Are there signs of this during the day? Are there signs of this within the city at all?
Of
Not
which piece?
of any of it. The elected
Well,
council. Where's the government? Where are the watchtowers? Where is the customs and traditions? Is there a site for any of this stuff?
so okay, so you're talking actual physical locales.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Under hubs.
yeah. Well, let's start with guilds. We can do. There's
Hmm.
a guild hall,
Yeah.
which we'll call it almost a rival to the council because a lot of political discussion takes place in the guild hall.
Yes.
Um,
Who are they favoring for
and they're
the
they're
next?
favoring for they're favoring their artisans, but what do you mean? Who are they favoring
Who do
for
they favor for the next? Uh,
leader?
to move into leadership, a leadership role. Kind of what I'm wondering.
Um, yeah,
No, I'm not.
we'll
I'm
have to
not.
think
I'm
about
not.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I'm not actually asking you. I'm thinking in my
sure.
head. This is like something that's going on. I feel like when I'm creating stuff, I don't always necessarily have the answer for it. But what might happen is that at some point during the game, somebody mentions something about, oh, this so and so is running for office, and then I start thinking in my head, and I make that connection, and I say, oh, okay, the guild favors this guy as opposed to the other guy. So, anyway,
Hmm.
just an idea.
No, I like that. Um, so as far as other locations, so I think the watchtowers are great, and then maybe they're spread out throughout the city.
Yeah,
But then there's one tower, there's one central tower,
one tower to
which
rule them all.
which is the seat, basically the seat of religious power.
Nice.
And maybe the tower sits atop the temple, and the temple is the where the inquisitors kind of do all their bureaucratic functions,
Right.
and
Right.
that's where the worship happens. And then kind of sprawling out in front of this temple is kind of the square
Mm.
where
Mm.
where the sacrifices and the rituals and that stuff happens for the people.
Right.
um
Okay, cool.
so
We
cool.
we're getting some good stuff here. How about I'm always disturbed as a teacher by
Blank
blanks
boxes.
boxes, but on the other hand, how are we feeling now about the basic setup of how things are? Do we feel like we have enough to move on to our next step, or it's kind of up to you, Steve? I don't want to dictate because what we're going to go into now is basically building our antagonist,
Sure.
um, and they would kind of come out of this.
Well, I think I'm it, what are they what's the thing, a pattern is forming, I
Okay.
guess,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like
Making
it's
connections.
getting, yeah, it's getting to that point, and we've got
Okay.
a few different characters and a few different things.
All right. So
um
So then with that, I mean, we're also free to hop around and hop all over the place in order to sort of build our world here. What we're going to move on to next is actually the antagonist. So I call this character the antagonist for a reason. So ordinarily, in most like fantasy games or any RPG, you're going to call your bad guy the bad guy or the villain. But the idea really is here, because we're doing something kind of particularly set in a noir sort of setting, uh, the bad guy might actually be kind of like the main character. We don't really know that quite yet. So we use the term antagonist, and antagonist is just the opposing force of the protagonist. So they're the chief foe of the protagonist. And so often, as we all kind of know, the most stories will sort of like present the protagonist as the hero. That would be, say, our Luke Skywalker, and the antagonist as the villain. But that, of course, is not always true. The antagonist doesn't always have to be a villain. And I think that, like, if you look at a movie, just to sort of cite a very simple example, if you look at a movie like Captain America: Civil War, not necessarily a good movie, but as far as our example goes, it's very good because the protagonist in that film, of course, is Captain America, and the antagonist is Tony Stark, Iron Man. Which is odd because ordinarily Iron Man would be your hero, and of course Captain America would be your hero. But in that particular film, those two forces, those have opposing viewpoints which come head to head, and indeed they cause the Civil War. So let's move along to our antagonist. And what I've come up with here, it's pretty simple, but it's just something to sort of light the fire and get us sort of going here. I have a few very simple questions which I thought would help us sort of develop who our antagonist is in this story, and then that would give us an idea of what they're going to do. Or what it is that they're going to do that is going to cause so much trouble for our protagonist. So, who is the antagonist? What's their history? What drives them? What do they seek? And how does it fulfill them? Because, like we kind of always are told, you're always the hero in your own story, even if you are the bad guy. You're doing things for a reason that is good for you. So what you're doing may not necessarily be villainy to you, but it could be heroic to you. Um, are there any conflicts between the antagonist and their, I write here minions, but what I really mean is the people that surround the antagonist? And if they happen to have minions, then so be it. Um, and one other last final interesting question that I like to ask, and not everybody does, but what would make the antagonist join or become the hero? So what would it be? What would have to happen in order to flip the antagonist from being an adversary to actually being joining the protagonist or actually fighting for the causes of the protagonist? So, Steve, again, I don't mean to tell you how to create an antagonist at all. And if you want, I will hit delete and we'll get rid of all this and we'll start from scratch. But does anything here jump out at you and give you an idea?
Well, yeah,
You don't have to be polite.
no, I think and here's where noir gets funny is
Hmm.
I think one of the big keys to a good noir tale is really not knowing who the antagonist is until kind of the big reveal.
Yeah.
And who you thought all along might have been the antagonist turns out to be misunderstood or working towards a different end, and who you thought might have been
Yeah.
a friend turns out to be a foe,
Yeah.
or whatever reason.
Hmm.
So in this tale, I think looking at it from the outside,
Right.
if we have this kind of oppressive theocratic cult, your inclination would be that head inquisitor Tito is probably the antagonist. But will that turn out to be the case? I don't know.
So I guess
So
what
that
we have to. Oh, go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
I was going to ask and say, what do we think the crime is here? Based on based on this sort of environment, and it sounds like we're very heavily leaning on this idea of there being the cult of owls,
Mm-hmm.
and the cult of owls being very, very strict. Do you have an idea or a sense for what kind of evil deed is growing out of this, if any?
Well, yeah, I mean my thought, and this is to bring the sword and sorcery stuff into it,
Mm-hmm.
is that the cult is planning to bring the god to life.
Ooh, okay.
And everything that they're doing is to try to curry favor with the god and manifest the owl god into real life. And in their cult, the owl god demands, obviously, like any god, he demands to be worshipped, and he demands to be obedience.
Yeah.
So that's where they get their secret police and their strictness and their adherence to ritual. um and so that's the cult's aim.
So then let me ask you this, because I feel like we're kind of pressing this issue and I'm a little unclear of it and I think it needs to be defined at this point. Um, is this going to be a case where the 4 or 5 or 6 party members enter the city and they discover that the cult is going to resurrect this this owl god or give it physical form or whatever, and it's going to be bad for everyone? Or is there a movement within, or out, I should say, without the cult that is trying to give it physical form and sort of start the ball rolling, even though the owl cult doesn't actually believe in resurrecting it? Like, I don't know if that sounds too complicated or what you're thinking, or if I've just confused you and everyone else watching, but
No, I what I was thinking, and you and I, like, again, letting you a little bit of the cat out of the bag. We talked about
yeah,
a heist story.
yeah.
So my kind of vision for this is that the PCs are their mission is to steal something of value
Mm,
from the cult. In fact, from the watchtower, one of the watchtowers, some kind of artifact.
mm,
And this artifact is central to the resurrection of this owl god. of which the PCs have no idea.
So in this case,
and really nobody in the city has anybody idea of it.
So in this case, the antagonist.
But this artifact.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in this case, the antagonist then is the cult of owls.
Correct.
And was it Tito or Tito?
Tito.
Okay. So let's start developing this then, in that case. So is Tito's our antagonist. So let's see. Or am I misunderstanding you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So let's go with Tito as the antagonist. So if you want, can we get... I can type us in there. I just feel bad if we disappear.
No, that's all right. I got it. And we'll call him the arch priest of the cult.
Okay. So what is it about him? What is his history and what drives him? What makes him want to resurrect or give physical form?
I would say that he has visions, maybe through some kind of scrying or communion with the owl god. He feels he's being directly influenced, directly getting prophecies from the owl god.
Yeah. Okay. That
Okay.
that works.
Okay. And I guess we can do these in order.
Yeah, they kind of...
What does he seek and how does he fulfill them? So what he seeks is to conduct this ritual to bring this owl god to the city. But I think he does it under the guise of something else. And we'll try to figure out what that something else is, because he knows, because of the visions he's gotten from the owl god, that the owl god is not coming to be a benevolent benefactor to the city. He's coming to devour half the people.
So
and
then
he doesn't want...
Go
ahead. No.
So then how does this fulfill him?
Because then he gets to be the right-hand man.
Ah, okay. I like this then. And so in exchange for having resurrected or given physical form to the owl god, he rules at the right hand.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. And are there conflicts between the antagonist and their minions?
So I would assume, and this is just an assumption I'm making on my own part here, but I would assume that he's got people working for him in satellite towers throughout the city that are kind of like putting all the little pieces in place in order to make this happen.
Correct, but I think it's important that they're unwitting. They're
right.
unwittingly doing this.
Right.
They're acting in his direction, but he hasn't told them why they're doing it. As far as they're concerned, they're just doing it for the betterment of the city.
So then remember how I mentioned in the Eyes of Wisdom that Lauren had mentioned? Remember how I mentioned how there was one captain maybe that was kind of having second doubts about this? Could this captain be possibly be sort of aware of what the Inquisitor is doing, and maybe that's what's causing the reservations. That's what's holding him back from being...
Yeah, or maybe he just knows that this Inquisitor is kind of sketchy and crazy. And maybe he's been there a long time. He's seen several different Inquisitors, and he sees, kind of the madness taking over.
Right. Right. Okay. So then are there conflicts between the antagonists and their minions?
Well, sure, especially if this captain has, um, a reputation among his men and women. Why don't we make some of the eyes of wisdom
Yes.
women?
Yes. Absolutely.
Or and so they're, he has some influence there
Okay,
that,
cool.
if pressed,
Hmm.
uh, could be, they could make them go against the head inquisitor,
Yeah.
possibly.
So the captain is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. What would make the antagonist join or become the hero?
We don't necessarily have to answer this. We could spend all night answering this. I only
Yeah,
offer this as a possible, like what I like to think about are twists.
sure.
And so the idea of possibly offering a twist to this is kind of cool in my head, but it might not suit the story or what you're trying to do with it. So we don't have to worry about it if you're not feeling it. And we can always go back to it as well.
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. So we have our basic antagonist at this point. So next thing that we kind of want to do here is we want to move on to just something I ripped off and call the setup and the pitch. And so the idea of the setup is it establishes like who the protagonists are, what the antagonists, who the antagonists are, and also the setting itself. And we also kind of think about some sort of inciting incident, which is the catalyst that begins our story, right? So Steve and I should say Steve has really come up with this idea of the cult of owls, and then there is a Grand Inquisitor that is trying to bring back an owl god. He's putting certain pieces in place all across the city-state for which we have no name yet. Um, but what we want to think about here is what's kind of the initial explosion, or what's the thing that's going to cause a ruckus, cause a disturbance here within the city. Now, that inciting incident could be it could be something that draws the PCs to the city. It could be something that happens after the PCs have arrived in the city. It could be something that the PCs maybe inadvertently cause. So let's take a closer look at the setup and the pitch. And we're going to answer or look at four basic questions, or at least start out with them. So what's the antagonist trying to do? And we're going to put it in concrete words here. How does it fulfill their needs? What prompts the antagonist to act? Now, we've kind of answered the second one for sure. Um, the first one we have answered in different pieces. But more importantly, I think here, the third and the fourth questions, what prompts the antagonist to act and maybe put that final piece into place, or start those pieces, might be our question. What is the inciting incident is also very important, because that is what's going to draw the attention of our PCs. So, Steve, I don't know if any of those do anything for you, give you any ideas, or make you want to completely rewrite my questions, but please let us know. What are you thinking at this point?
Well, I think, kind of setting this caper into motion.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe under inciting incident
Mm-hmm.
is the PCs unwittingly either steal something or prevent something from getting to the Inquisitor, which is a huge piece of his plan.
Yeah.
So this artifact that we were just talking about, um, I was thinking either the artifact already exists in the watchtower and the PCs go to steal it,
Yeah.
Or maybe there's a caravan which is carrying this item and the PCs
Ooh.
stumble on it and
Ooh.
take it. And
Ooh.
for to them, it's just a shiny object that probably
Yes.
has some value.
Yes.
But to Tito, it's the key to his plan.
Ooh. Steve, you're good. You're good. Let's write that down. Write that down very quickly. So
Okay.
the inciting incident is basically that they steal something that's super
Yeah,
valuable?
the theft of the artifact, which is crucial to the resurrection ritual. And
Maybe it's the last. I mean, this is probably already you were assuming this, but the last
yeah,
item needed. It's the staff of
right. It's
Ra.
exactly. It's the linchpin of of the last bit of the ritual that's needed. And
Yeah.
so once this thing goes missing by these savages who don't even know what they got,
Yes.
it throws Taito into a frenzy.
Yes. I like that. So then, in that particular case, um, they're going to be stealing something, and I assume that this is going to be like a first act kind of like thing,
Correct.
or maybe it's something they've already done, and maybe when they show up, I don't know. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But in that particular case, can we hop up to the question above that? And I'm going to ask you about this. What prompts the antagonist to act? Um, do you think this is relevant? Do you think that this is a relevant question at all? Because what I'm thinking here is perhaps this is the last piece. Like there are 7 pieces that are needed, and then the eighth piece actually, like, here's what I see are the watchtowers set up like in a big form. And again, I don't want to tell you, they're set up in a big formation, kind of like an owl across the city. And like
Hmm.
the seventh one is the eye, and the eighth one is the one that's being transported on this wagon or whatever into the city. It's been dug up out of the mountains or something. And that eighth one has to go into place right where the second eye of the owl would be, and then the owl will come to life. It'll like just come up out of the city itself somehow and form.
Right.
So could this prompting of the antagonist be like he's finally gotten that piece dug up out of the mountain?
Yeah,
He's
and
having it delivered?
maybe even more dramatic. The ritual has to take place on a certain part of the lunar eclipse cycle, and that if it doesn't happen, tomorrow, it can't happen for another 200 years.
That's our custom and tradition. Remember how we kind of had that a
Right.
little bit blank, but maybe that's the third day of the 7th month of the 15th year or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe the culture is very attuned to astrology and that sort of thing.
So then he's having it brought in, and there's only 24 hours or 48 hours or something before it needs to be put into place. And if that doesn't happen, you have to wait another 1,000 years for the
Right.
owl to be brought back. That's good. That's good. So the prompt, I guess, here in this case would be the deadline in some arbitrary amount of time, just enough time to make the PCs panic.
Right. Okay.
So then we know what the antagonist is trying to do. We know how it fulfills their needs because they want to rule as
Yeah.
their right hand man. So kind of quickly now. Oh, thank you for filling it in. I was that visually works very well. Um, so what I had actually thought of next, but I don't think we have to focus on it because we've got about 30 minutes left, and I think it would be really cool to start building our story here.
Okay.
I had thought about writing up like a story pitch or an idea, but that would just be sort of like a couple sentences that basically say what we're doing. And so the idea of these worksheets and these exercises is not that you must fill out every single thing. The idea is to give you, and I'll be making these available, by the way, in links below. The idea is to give you some place to start to generate ideas. And if you want to use and fill in all of this stuff, then so be it. That's great. But if you don't want to, that is absolutely not necessary. So the idea of the story pitch, theoretically to me, is to make like a concrete statement for you, the game master, to kind of understand what the story is about and what the stakes are. And then from that, usually your story kind of grows out of it. But I think for this, in the interest of time, I think we can just move on. And I also think that Steve kind of knows already what he's doing here, so I don't think it's necessary to do this step. Unless, of course, Steve, you're about to panic and you're like, my goodness, this
No, we
miraculous
can.
idea that you've thought
No.
of, I need to do it. Um, so let's move on then to the next idea is, or the fifth part of our six parts tonight is to work on the hook of our story. So the hook of the story is going to be all about the inciting incident, how it affects the world and the setting, what the conflict is, and then most importantly, how the protagonists are drawn into the conflict. Okay, so the hook is the moment in the opening of an adventure that hooks the players into the story, and the hook may come in many forms, but typically it basically compels the players to move forward in the adventure. It's kind of like the first step in the adventure, and sort of like it's like getting your hand stuck on something and not being able, or stuck in a machine and not being able to get it out. To continue with machine analogies tonight. Um, so as far as the hook goes, Steve, um,
Mhm.
what do you think in the inciting incident is? Let's flesh this out a little bit more.
Well, yeah, I had originally thought of it them stealing it from the watchtower, but I'm really more and more liking this caravan idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the inciting incident is somebody, maybe one of the guild leaders,
Mm-hmm.
maybe our silversmith, uh,
Mm.
hires the PCs to to steal the object that he knows is coming into the city, and he kind of tips them off and offers them a lot of gold for it.
What is the motivation of the silversmith? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
Why
I
does
think
does the silversmith know that this is what it's being used for?
no.
Aha, there we go.
He just knows it's very valuable.
Okay. So the inciting incident is essentially going to be the PCs being offered the job, doing the job, and then sort of discovering that they're being hunted for it. So that's kind of like
Correct.
there. Okay, so let's see what we can come up with for for that. Steve is a very good typist. I've watched many of these. I've watched many of these, and you wouldn't believe how many like typos people miss, but
Oh,
Steve knows what he's doing. Now, so the caravan with the artifact is coming to town, and the PCs are hired to steal it at the direction of the guild leader, just out of simple greed. How does this now, Steve? The way that I had sort of envisioned this next activity, for lack of a better word, sorry to use classroom terms, um, I had sort of the idea here is what happens to those seven different aspects when the jewel goes missing or when the caravan comes into town. Um, how are they impacted by this so that when the PCs sort of circulate through the town, you don't just show up at the copper at the at the weapon shop and they're like, nothing really new going on. The weapon shop, somebody at like a merchant's like at a store or at a restaurant or whatever, some part of the economy, can say, oh, we've been impacted because maybe all of the items that were coming in on that wagon train, the wagon got tipped over a cliff, and so now we don't have any supplies for the next week. So the idea with this is to link those 7 different aspects of culture to this event so that when the PCs move around in the town, the townspeople and the NPCs that we as GMs are going to be running, even if we haven't created an NPC for that particular shop that they go to, we have an idea of how that NPC will feel about what's going on if they know. Um, so, Steve, again, not to put you on the spot, any ideas about how this might affect 2 or 3 or many different aspects of culture within the city? This
Well,
theft?
my thought is that the theft happens, and it's such a shock to Tito that he basically puts the city into uh, a lockdown to recover it, and it's brutal, and maybe he has um, you know people killed in the street unless somebody speaks up,
Mm.
kind of putting the characters into a moral dilemma of, wow, now people are dying because of this thing that we've got.
Yeah.
you know
I like that idea. That hadn't even occurred to me. And what's funny and what sort of comes to mind here is if the leader of this cult is the one that puts things into lockdown, that's got to cause some friction between him or the cult and the government organization. And
Correct.
that
Yeah.
captain that's kind of caught in the middle, maybe half there, working for the cult, but also like a normal guy, sort of, or normal woman, whoever it happens to be. Um, so, can we think of a few different ways that this lockdown will affect the 7 aspects of the setting: the religious aspects, the social organizations, the language, anything?
um I was thinking that one of the rules
Hmm?
put in place would be, um maybe shutting down the markets,
Mm.
which would certainly affect the economics of
Okay,
it.
cool. So,
um
yeah.
and so obviously the guilds and the craftspeople
Yeah.
are upset by this.
Yeah.
How else would it affect it? So because here's the thing: nobody other than Tito and maybe a few of his closer lieutenants
Mm.
know of the importance of this.
Mm.
So to everybody else, including the eyes of wisdom, they're seeing it as like, okay, this run of the mill,
Yeah.
heist that stole something
Yeah.
is now all of a sudden causing the Inquisition to go insane.
Yeah.
So nobody knows
Yes.
why,
So
but they're like, this is an irrational reaction.
so how about this though? That means that
Mhm.
90% of the people out there are going to think this is irrational. The other 10% are going to be kind of like, this is suspicious. Something else is going on here.
Right,
So
right.
maybe 2 or 3 think nothing's going on, and one thinks something's going on. So we already know that our captain is going to kind of have an idea because he's on the, or she is on the inside. We know that as far as the economy goes, the markets are being shut down. How about, so I'm thinking about our other 7 aspects, the the arts and literature. Is there some sort of, as far as arts and literature goes, is there some sort of, I don't know. Are they clamping down on people for some reason? Are they most suspicious of people within the arts and literature realm and like thinking that maybe they have something to do with it, or they're, I don't know. Um, Trying to think.
In the arts and literature realm.
So we have arts and lit. We have social organizations. We have the merchants, which we've already kind of talked about because uh, the markets are shut down. We also have the religious aspects. What's going on at the temples? Is there something big gearing up, and maybe he's calling for prayer in certain?
Well, I think what we mentioned before about the timing of it.
Mm.
Maybe to most, it was going to be a big festival and
Mm.
a big ceremony, but not with the understanding that it was even bigger than just maybe it's their Christmas, so they're all preparing for it, just as a regular event, an annual event,
Yeah.
not realizing that this was the once in a thousand year event.
Right. Right. So
You
then,
know,
how is it affecting? How is it? Okay, there we go.
so preparing for the holiday.
Feel free to write it down, Steve.
Yeah.
Preparations for the holiday are in full swing.
Okay.
Um, Arts and lit. Oh, language slash arts and lit. Is there some sort of, there's not movable type, is there?
No,
No,
no.
we're a little bit early for that, I
Yeah,
guess.
I think so.
How would we get messages out to help look for this thing without revealing to people that it's missing? Is it possible that they're sending out, of course, they're sending out the captain and the eyes of wisdom to search for it,
Right. And
but are
and
they,
that's where your hoot calls might come in.
oh, in the night?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so there we go. So there's an unusual amount of activity as far as language goes. There's an unusual amount of activity in owldom, shall we say.
So using modern parlance, the chatter, like the
Yeah.
terrorist chatter,
Yes.
there's a lot of that going on.
That's right. There's a lot of crosstalk on the owl channels.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Can we get one or two more? Something a little bit more concrete. We don't have to stick on this one. We can just keep moving along, though, on the other hand, and come back to it. What do you feel?
Yeah. Why don't we move on?
Okay, we'll keep moving on. We'll see what comes up. So then the conflict is basically that the the conflict comes in the form of the Inquisitor not being able to do his thing and putting a lockdown on the entire city, right? So everybody's kind of walking on eggshells at this point. Is that safe? Or you think
Yeah.
it's something different?
I think everybody's walking on eggshells, and the PCs who have this item are now, kind of coming to the idea that, this is causing a lot more than they even thought. And,
Yes.
their goal originally was to deliver this to the guild leader, but maybe they have different thoughts about, maybe they just want to get out of the city,
Yeah.
you know.
Right. And the entire city is now nobody gets out. So
Right.
I'm starting to see this as our act 1 is they're hired to steal it. There's a lockdown. And then they realize this and they try to get out, but they can't get out. And then act 2 and 3 go on to other things. But the conflict is perhaps that the lockdown happens and prevents them from leaving.
Right.
Um,
And this is where you can, pepper NPCs in
mm,
to kind of give them information maybe about what's the bigger plot here, and that they're in obviously grave danger.
yeah,
And certainly I think, as far as plot, scenes that we're going to get to in the different acts,
yeah,
a team of either Eyes of Wisdom or a team of even maybe special assassins come after them, uh, to get them, to get that object. Because
Ooh,
at this point, it's, this is code red here for
yeah,
Tito.
yeah.
You know,
So with that in mind, then, how are the protagonists drawn into the conflict? They're offered a simple job.
yeah,
Is that it? They're
yeah.
offered a simple job,
Their
and then it turns
their
out to be more than
offers,
they can chew.
yeah, offered what appears to be a simple job and turns into, global cataclysm here, for them.
Potentially, as they often are in one-shots.
Correct.
Um, and so Steve is going to put that the final few words there on our last section, but I just wanted to say a word about the next section, which we're going to skip over. So what Steve and I are drawing up here is basically it's a one shot. And the idea that, and again, one of the kind of rules that we made up, and we didn't actually mention it on the stream, but one of the rules we thought about was, well, this is just going to be a one shot. It's going to be like a convention game. It's the sort of game that you go to and people are going to throw you a bone and basically they're going to take the bait and they're going to run with it. And then the whole entertainment part of it, the fun part of it, is running the gauntlet through all of these ideas. So in a more in like a deeper game, in a game like a long-term game where we did a session 0 and we know who the players are and we know who the player characters are, you might actually sit down and you might start thinking about who those players and player characters are and develop hooks individually. So these are individual aspects. So let's say that you have a religious character, player character. You might pepper in the idea that this religion is something that goes against their own religion, or the god is something that actually works alongside with their own god. And you flavor and interest the different player characters in a way that draws them in. So they don't just sort of get to your hook and then say, you know what, we're all going to do something else for today. But we're not doing that sort of a game. We are doing a one shot, which in the interest of fun is just all about taking the bait. Not making it too obvious, but taking the bait. So now our final step in all of this, and this may seem like the scariest step, and please contain yourselves when you see the next set of things that we're going to do here. But the next thing that we're going to do is work on the 3 acts of our story. Now, the idea of a 3-act structure is not as old as you think. The classic, and when I say classic, I mean going back thousands of years, classic writers have argued and debated about how many acts and what the ideal number of acts are for any particular story. I particularly choose to go with a 3-act structure. So it's a basic model that's used in fiction, and it divides a story up into 3 different parts. And this is how most films these days are made. There is the setup, which is typically the first 20 or 30 minutes of the film. There is the confrontation, which is a series of kind of trials and rising actions or rising movements that put the protagonists into peril, and that usually takes up about 50 something minutes or maybe 60 minutes. And then there is the resolution, which is the final 30 minutes or so of any given story. So if you kind of take a look at the 3-act structure, what you'll see is that you've got about 25% of it at the beginning, 25% at the end, and then 50% through the middle. So what we're going to do now is build, and I think you'll see that it's not probably going to be as tough as it might seem, because in a way we've already sort of built our first act, and it's just a question of sort of plugging things in. What you see here is basically a table which is going to allow us to build scenes for 3 different acts. We have the first act, which is the setup. The second act, which is usually a series of confrontations that put the PCs into increasing danger. And then finally, the resolution, which is typically the confrontation with the big bad guy and the way that the story ends. Now, I divided these 3 acts up into scenes. 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C, 3A, 3B, and then the final confrontation. Now, what's interesting and what's so much fun about a role-playing game is that these scenes don't necessarily go in the right order, but they don't go in this order. They go in the order that the players decide to pursue clues and to pursue ideas and to pursue their thoughts in it. So I'm always ready to shuffle these around, but I have in my head for each act 3 different scenes or sometimes 2, or sometimes kind of just 1, really, depending on how big the act is going to be. And usually each scene has a bit of a goal, and that goal has to be fulfilled. And when all of the goals of each scene in an act are fulfilled, then a gate opens up, and the players can move on to Act 2. So Steve, you
Yes.
look terrified of what I've just explained, but
No.
don't worry, I'm going to be here to work us through it. Um, can we set up our Act 1? I think that we kind of know some things about Act 1 already. And I'm going to
Yes.
ask you to kind of tell us what those things are, and then I'll let you know maybe where you want to plug them in, or you can tell me. So, what are some things we know?
Sure. So some things we know that the characters are lately arrived from out of town. They're out of
Hmm.
towners.
Sounds like a
Uh,
prelude to me.
yeah. Um, and then we know that they get hired
Hmm.
to, because they've come from out of town, they've got no money, and in order to get a little bit of money, they look like a perfect, you know, patsy for stealing. So
Oh, I like that detail. Yeah.
they get hired to um what is it, like hijack, what is it when you do a, oh, to rob the stagecoach,
Yeah.
to mix another genre in here, but hired to rob the stagecoach.
Well, how about
uh
they're delivering the week's supply, that a caravan is delivering the week's supply of goods, and we can call it the stagecoach, or we call it the,
right.
yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Or rob the caravan, we'll call it caravan just to
Sure.
keep some consistency here. Yeah. So what else will happen in Act 1? Another scene. um
So here's the thing.
yeah, go ahead.
They're hired to rob it, right? But once they
Mhm.
rob it, they have to get it to a certain spot. They have to get it to, who's the one you were saying, the silversmith hires them, and they need to
Right.
bring it to what spot?
The guild hall.
Okay. So that tells me, and here's my guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
Now, are they going to bring it right to the guild? Is this robbery being done out in the open, or is there a secret spot where they have to meet them?
Well, I hadn't really thought that through, but I think that certainly would make sense.
So,
Like, I don't think I would imagine that they would rob the caravan at night,
yeah,
you know, and then do everything at night.
yeah.
And then once the dawn came, then the word would get out that that caravan didn't make it
So
where it was
this
supposed to get to.
this tells me that we already have, like, we have a scene, a setup, which takes place I don't know where these folks are going to be hired, right? We also are
Right.
going to have a scene where, or at least a, a red herring scene where they're supposed to get to another spot, right? So maybe the fake scene that we think they're going to get to, like for scene 1C, is something like some secret location under a bridge somewhere where they're going to pass the item for the money, and then they're going to get the hell out of Dodge or whatever.
Right.
And I'm just guessing. I'm saying under a bridge, but it could be under a watchtower. Actually, it could
Sure.
be
Yeah.
something that comes from our 7 aspects of culture. It could be, you know, one of the government buildings or something like that. So we already have 2 of them built. We also know that there's going to be a caravan. So they're hired at some place. So scene
Mhm.
1A is going to be the caravan itself and robbing it.
Okay.
But What NPCs just go and rob a caravan without picking up supplies?
Correct. So,
Or do they
uh,
get their supplies from the setup?
no, I think them exploring the city is probably good because that's when, as a GM, that's the perfect opportunity to start
Mm,
dropping, foreshadowing hints about what this city's all about. Because
right.
remember, everything that we just did with the world building, your players have no idea when they get into this game.
Yeah.
So, having that sort of shopping scene, I think really lets you dump a lot of information
Yes. And when we say
that
shop,
yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, go
Well, I
ahead.
was going to say when we say shopping, what we're really talking about is touring the city here because as the PCs are moving about throughout the city, they're going to see watchtowers. They're going to see the government installations. They're going to see the eyes of wisdom, which are patrolling through the alleys and patrolling maybe just the surface streets. We're going to see the different things that we came up with. We're going to hear the rumors of the hooting owls in the night. So these are instantly, because we came up with our 7 aspects of culture, we kind of have a lot of things to sort of pepper into to season our descriptions of the city itself. Um, so can we come up with a physical location for each one of these things just so that we have something to hang our description off of? So, for example, the setup and the inciting incident where they're hired to rob it. So, if they're bringing it to the guild leader agent at the guild hall, where are they hired? Are they hired out in the open?
Um, no, I think maybe they went to the marketplace
Mm-hmm.
and they were kind of like spotted by a couple of these maybe like guild henchmen
Mm.
as somebody that might be good for the job.
Right. Out of towners, clueless looking, simple looking by city standards, perhaps, unsophisticated. These are the sort of guys that if they fail, no one's going to take them seriously. They're going to get rid of them really quick, or they're not really going to talk, or at least not in any intelligible way, perhaps. Um, okay, so that sounds good for our setup. How about the robbery itself then? Where is that going to take place?
I'm envisioning it as the caravan gets through the city gates and then it has to weave its way to the main watchtower. And so somewhere along that uh maybe a boulevard, broad boulevard is where they have to figure out where they're going to be able to get this thing.
I like this idea because of like the cinematic qualities, but let me ask you a question of logic.
Hmm?
This is something that I weigh in my head. Now, it's like I'm picturing like the nuclear missile being or the nuclear bomb being driven through Gotham City and like Commissioner Gordon and the police officers kind of like trying to head them all off of the pass and get it. I think that that's like a really exciting thing. But would they be doing it in the city where people can see them or would they have done it outside the city before?
But remember, this is at night.
True.
So everybody's asleep except for these caravanners who really they don't even know what they're carrying.
Yes.
Only the guild leader and however he knows of it and the inquisitor know that this is something other than just any old caravan that probably doesn't have anything of value.
Yes.
So it's not even really well defended
Yes. I think
because if it yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say because if it were well defended then it would be a target. But
Yes.
it's not really a target because nobody knows.
Yeah. So Andy Kwong in the chat has just made a comment
Yeah.
here, and Andy said, "Wouldn't you change the item for money before shopping, right? So like, let's say that they get the item and they try to sell it and actually turn it in and then make money off of it." Um, I agree. I think they would be doing something like that. But Andy, one thing that I try to do, and I didn't do it very well with this diagram, the scenes are labeled as 1A, 1B, and 1C. That doesn't necessarily mean that they happen in that order. What I ordinarily do, and I'm kind of working on a PDF version of this, is I actually create a flowchart. And I'll have like a ring that represents Act 1. And then within Act 1, I have three different bubbles. And I write those three different scenes in it. And the scenes actually happen in whatever order the PCs want them to happen. So Steve happened to actually mention that the shopping is after touring or after the robbery, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's when it happens. It's just one of the scenes that could happen. Logically, I would probably copy and paste, like my personality, I would copy and paste and put shopping and touring the city above it. I'm hinting, Steve. You don't have to do it.
No, I've got it.
I would put it in 1A, but different people are different. But yeah, I see what you're saying. And Andy, I think one important thing here that I always like to keep in mind is that the events, I try to have the events happen in whatever order the PCs want them to happen. And that way I'm not really railroading them. I keep it like an open box. It's somewhere between like a sandbox and like a series of events. And what I try to do is move the action and excitement from one event to the next. So let's say the robbery is going to happen here, and then the shopping is going to happen here. But for some reason, the PCs come up with a great idea where they want to rob something from here and then go shopping over here. On the fly in my head, and it doesn't always work, I'm just going to swap the two. So that's what I meant by having a scene A, 1A, 1B, and 1C. So I digress. But at any rate, go ahead, Steve.
But I think it's a good digression because here's the thing, Matt, and you've both been my GM and I have been your GM
Yeah.
in a number of games, and sometimes you anticipate that an NPC with a valuable bit of information will turn up in scene 1A, but the PCs do scene 1C first.
Right.
And so you can always put that NPC into scene 1C. The important thing is that NPC shows up and gives them that bit of information.
Yeah.
But when it happens, that's where you have to do the improv.
Yeah. And
This is it. Yeah. It's a good.
and it works to varying degrees, like depending on luck. I got to be honest, like whenever it works really well, sometimes it's honestly just sort of like luck. I feel like I put a little bit of like effort into doing it, but it's honestly like a lot of the time when something works really well, it's luck. But I think prepping and creating a form kind of like this beforehand and at least thinking about it can increase your my father used to say that, and of course this is a common saying, luck is the byproduct of effort. And I think if you put a little bit of effort into designing your plan beforehand, you can make that luck for yourself. So for example, the PCs might actually get hired to rob the caravan and then are told to take it to the guild hall, but or some secret location, but maybe they are suspicious and they go to visit that secret location first before they've gone to shopping or touring the city or whatever. So I kind of try to stay and work on, fly by the seat of my pants and sort of make it work. In other words, um, okay. So let's keep moving on here. We have four possible scenes for our beginning. Now, what is the thing that has to happen before we move on to get to Act Two? Do they basically have to rob it?
Yes. And in my envisioning of this tale, it goes easier than they would ever imagine
Right.
because you
That's the
don't want them
suspicious part.
right. And I mean, number one, you don't want them to fail or feel like it's done, but then they also have to be like, wow, we just stole this thing and we faced no resistance.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that's actually a really good point. And I think actually now that I think about it, it can't just be the robbing part of it. It has to be robbing it and then getting to the location
Yeah,
or attempting to get to the location. Are they going to actually make it to the secret location?
that see, no, or maybe when they get there, they find that the guild leader has been stabbed.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Like the change never happens
Mm-hmm.
because the whole point of the plot is that they're holding on to this thing that they don't really know the value of, but they know a lot of people want it, and they've got it, and they don't have anybody to give it to right now.
So then what are the things that they have to, and I know you moved on to the summary for Act 2, but can we
Sure.
put in a sentence, in order to move on to Act 2, the protagonist must what? What are
They
they
they must uh, get the item
yeah.
and uh, deliver. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I can't type anymore. I don't know what. Okay, and deliver to the guild leader, but he has been dispatched, leaving them in limbo, leaving them with a valuable item and nowhere to bring it. And that's when the other things, environmental things, get into motion. Meaning, that's when the uh, Inquisition comes crashing down on everybody. And that might not be till morning, so they may not realize that it's a big deal until after they've slept, and then the whole city, once they wake up, is in a state of panic.
Let me ask something that is related to what Andy said. So
Yeah,
let's say that we're the PCs and we show up and our contact has been stabbed and we're like, what are we going to do with this? We have no connection. What if we try and fence it someplace else? And when we fence it, that's actually what kind of sets all this in motion because you fence it with the wrong person.
I think that's one way, and this is where I think, honestly, Matt, this is where I think the actions of the PCs
Yeah,
can kind of dictate.
right,
Some PCs may say, "Well, let's just take it out of the city and sell it in another city,"
right.
and some may say, "Let's try to sell it here." And so any one of those, and then this is where you want to admit as a GM that even though the players are in control, you're ultimately in control.
Right.
Is you can make it that no matter which one of those things they choose to do, you have a plan for what happens to them, and not a railroad, but
Right.
you know, yeah,
They're
uh,
beats. They're major beats that are going to happen. And
exactly,
and I'd say that one of the beats here that we can kind of build our second act off of is one thing that we do know is once that item is stolen, the whole city goes into lockdown within
right,
like an hour at the because you got to figure I'm anticipating the PCs stealing it, and if they're anything like you and the people I play with normally,
yeah,
it's going to be a major disaster. So the idea is that maybe this caravan goes off the rails, fires started, you know, livestock, or I should say draft horses, things like that, are killed. There's a huge mess, and the whole city kind of wakes up. And at this point, they kind of have a choice because while no one knows that they took it, they are looking for the people that just caused this problem. So no matter where they go, they're going to have to be really cautious. And maybe at this point, they don't necessarily have to try and sell it here. They can just their thinking is let's get out of here, go to the next city or two cities over or three or four and sell it there where we can. And so when they try to get out, they can't. I don't know, just an idea.
yeah. No, I think that's exactly what I was thinking.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
where do we have what are our two or three scenes that we're going to have for Act 2 then in that particular
Well,
case?
I think one of the scenes is a meeting with the eyes
Hmm.
and the captain. And I think this is important because here's where, ostensibly the captain he's working for the church, but he's also his own guy. So I think the meeting with him and the way that the PCs treat him will kind of dictate where he's going to fit into the story.
Right.
So I think a meeting and an encounter with the captain is very important.
So how would they encounter him either trying to flee the city or maybe when they try to capture the PCs?
I don't know that the eyes would know that the PCs, like, I kind of envision it as, the captain is doing the sweep
Yeah.
and the PCs are obviously outsiders.
Yeah.
So they would, obviously arouse some kind of suspicion
Hmm.
just by virtue of being outsiders.
Okay.
Um, so I think that's where they can be encountered. Certainly, if they take your other method where they try to fence it,
Hmm.
that could certainly, the fence could be an informant, and that could do it, or bring it to a head.
Okay. So
Um,
through Rook by Crook, they're going to have some sort of a meeting with the captain
Correct.
and the eyes. And now the captain, depending on their behavior, is either going to sort of play along with them or what?
Yeah, and maybe try to figure out, like he may even see what the item is, because
Hmm.
remember, nobody knows what was stolen. So maybe
Right.
maybe him seeing it will kind of tip him off that, hey, why is this thing here?
Or maybe he somehow has insider information and he knows it's the only
Exactly.
valuable thing on that in that caravan that could get it
Right.
or they could to do it. So then what's going to happen is there going to be like a mini combat where there may be an Alamo last stand or an attempted last stand and then they have to either they can't die because if they if they die our story's over, but perhaps they
Right.
can fight them until they decide to capture them rather than kill them.
Right. Right. And I think this is also going to play into what we talked about right in the beginning about what kind of society this is.
Mm.
And even though it has the trappings of maybe something very authoritarian, there's also something very egalitarian about
Right.
it. And these eyes cannot just willy-nilly start, executing people, but when they start doing that, because of the theft, maybe the captain is like, "Hey, this is not what we're about. How are these orders coming down, and why are some people following them and some people not?" You know.
So
Uh,
so could this be kind of like the central part of the story where someone turns and maybe the captain becomes an ally with them and offers to help them
yeah, I could
if they
very
treat him
easily
the
see
right
that
way?
happening.
If they treat
Right.
him the right way.
Very easily see that. Yeah, and then I'm also envisioning, and this is where maybe we're beyond the scope of all the being able to put the whole thing together, but like I could see the other guild leaders uh being involved in seeing the PCs as maybe, hey, they didn't steal it to give it to Argent. They stole it and then they killed Argent so they could keep it for themselves.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you've got that element that's after the PCs.
Okay. So
So
what are our scenes then? We have a scene where they're kind of captured and possibly killed. I don't know if that's going to
mhm,
take place on the city or in a building or something like that that we kind of have to have ready to go. And then once
yeah.
this happens, we're going to have a kind of a moment between the captain and the PCs. So
Mhm.
what are our next scenes though? We have to have a moment where he decides to let. Does he take them in?
No, I don't think he'd be able to do that because I don't think that he would have complete control over the other people.
Hmm.
So maybe he can give them some guidance on where to go.
Oh, he helps them escape.
Right. I think really at this point, escape for the PCs is really where they need to go.
Right.
Because they're holding the hot potato, so to speak, and chaos is reigning all around them.
Right.
And they really don't know what's happening,
Let me
but they
ask
know they got to get out.
let me
Yeah.
ask you this. So do we want the arc of Act 2? They're captured or they're confronted and captured. They end up having to they end up with an ally on their side that looks the other way. But now we have to think about what happens in Act 3. Is Act 3 them getting out, or is it going to be one of those things where like they're taking the eye and they're about to place it in there and they have to stop it, or is it just simply about them getting out? What direction do you see it going here? Because that will kind of dictate what happens in Act 2.
Well, honestly, I see it going where the plot of the god is revealed.
Mm,
And so, where once they were just ruffians, hired to do a job, now they have to become the people that can save the city from doom.
okay. So
You
then
know, and yeah, go ahead.
So then what are our scenes? This is, I guess, what I'm trying to get at because I'm having a tough time thinking about how this would kind of like go through like the steps to go through to get to this point. Do you have any ideas?
Well, I think that once the captain kind of comes to their side,
Mm,
there needs to be something revelatory,
mm,
kind of insightful to them, that what they're holding is more than just an object.
right.
And that could be an encounter with maybe a team of, rather than the secret police, maybe they're, a team of hyper loyal inquisitors,
Right.
and just call them inquisitors.
Those are the people that show up. So then the eyes of wisdom show up, and they are sort of the fist or the hand, and then the
Mhm.
inquisitors show up, and they're the ones that are talking. And then in this scene where they're captured, that's maybe when they either have to escape on their own, or if they've been good to the captain maybe lets them go.
Right.
So then we have a meeting with the eyes and the captain. What would 2B be then? Would that be something in some sort of either in a prison, a temporary prison, a local like neighborhood prison, or like in a like a wagon that they're held in, or they're shackled or something?
Yeah, maybe call it a holding cell.
Mm,
And that's when the inquisitors might come in, and with the full intention of executing them.
right,
And then that's when the captain would be like, that's not our way here, what's going on.
right.
you know
So then with that, okay, so we have the holding cell. They need to somehow get out of that either with the captain's help or they need to get out on their own.
Mhm.
Hopefully, not get executed because that would just be a quick
Right.
end to the story. Um, Once that's happened, though, what is going to be the big thing that pushes us into Act 3? Because Act 3 is going to be the final confrontation where they have to save the city.
Right.
Does this mean that the eye they lose the eye? They lose this piece, and they have a choice of either getting out or going after the piece. And maybe in getting out of the jail cell, that's when they lose it. Because obviously the captain would have confiscated it, right?
Right.
And be holding
Right.
on to it, and they'd be trapped inside the cell, and they'd get out. But now the Inquisitors have it, and they're on horses, and they're taking it toward the destination, right?
Mhm.
So they have to get out. Once they get out, they face like a moral sort of choice where they can either end the adventure there, or um, or they can attempt to stop
Right.
the Inquisitors from getting it to the tower. So I would say that their escape is probably like the climax of Act 2 somehow.
Hmm.
And then we move into Act 3, and Act 3 would be about them kind of like realizing we're either going to get out um, and just no longer be involved, or we are going to actually try and stop this thing. And maybe the motivation for stopping it can actually just be the fact that maybe as the closer it gets to the watchtower, the more stuff around them starts to crumble. And it's forming all through the third act.
Right.
And they're actually in danger of getting killed. And maybe a big fiery gate goes up all around the city. We're not trying to railroad the players at all. But and then so the idea is that 3A, 3B, and confrontation we know is going to be them going to the tower, right?
Right.
We know that. Hopefully. Not guaranteed. Not if
No.
not if you guys are playing, but if normal thinking human beings are playing. So then how do we see like a couple of scenes leading up to 3A and 3B? So at the end of Act 2, they escape, but the Inquisitors are on their way towards the Watchtower with that item. The whole city starts to go up. What are a couple of scenes we can do that one or two that can bridge us to the Watchtower? Or
No, no, I feel like I've hit a little bit of a stop and think phase, because I think I definitely feel like this can get there.
yeah.
It's just I think what's been missing a little bit
Hmm.
is the clues along the way, and that's not
I
unusual
agree.
when you're plotting
I
an
agree.
adventure like this. Is you have to give clues along the way, and
Yeah.
because we're doing this in an hour, it's not readily apparent, but I think that's where you get other uh, it could be one of the artists that we were talking about before who are patrons
Right.
of this cult, and they might give clues, or the ward captain,
Hmm.
he might start giving clues. So like that's where the people that they might be able to meet along the way can kind of, because that's the essence of noir, right?
Yeah.
Like what's really going on is this inquisitor is turning his back on the city and going to murder half of them unwittingly. And how does that get revealed? And it's got to come out in different
I
you know
I think, I mean, it could come out in any number of ways. So here's what I basically see, because you're kind of right. We're kind of running out of time. We had intended this to be a couple hours, but this is going
yeah.
on a lot longer, and I don't want to keep it going too much. We're forming the arc, which I think is the most important thing in this case. But here's what I see: the PCs escape. The NPCs, meaning the cult, are speeding toward that final watchtower in order to put that piece into place. Now, the whole city, the other NPCs, maybe the members of the Artisans Guild, maybe other religions that are competing, maybe the government entities or that are kind of like running the city. Perhaps it's not just the owl itself, but its minions are starting to appear and wreak havoc through the city. And that is
Right.
happening to our different NPCs. So they have a choice of either trying to hightail it out and get out, or, out of guilt, perhaps the NPCs that they'd made friends with along the way are actually suffering because of it. And so they make a beeline straight for the tower. And the tower is the place where, the captain knows that the Inquisitors are trying to get the piece to them, right? So he knows, and maybe everything is the celebrations that have been going on throughout the entire day have all surrounded on some ritual that's going to take place at midnight in the city later on, or the next day, or whatever time frame we want to put this under. Um, and then with that, they know where they're going. So there's going to be a scene in which they have to now chase the Inquisitors, and then maybe a scene where they have to stop and combat them. And the part where they combat them is probably at the base of the watchtower. And then it might they either stop it from entering the watchtower, or they they blow their rolls and it gets to the watchtower. And then if we want to crank it another degree hotter, we have them go inside the watchtower, and maybe they're going to sacrifice themselves in order to stop that item from getting
Right.
placed in there.
Right. And then I will say, like we talked about the clues and things like that, the item itself could hold clues. And this is where the PCs and their cleverness comes in,
Mm.
like if the item has writing on it,
Yeah.
maybe they take it to some kind of bard or some kind of lore master,
Oh, that's
like
true.
and so that's where all these things, like you're not necessarily putting them into scenes, because like it's revelations.
Yeah.
And that revelation, if one of the characters is a psionic, or one of the characters has different powers, you kind of build to the strength of the party
Right.
and allow them to get the information. What information you want to get out.
Yeah.
You want them to learn that there's a ritual that's happening at this holiday, and it's going to kill a lot of people. How they get that information, let them tell you how they get it, you know
Yes.
and
Yes.
and so and so that's why I think we're futzing a little bit with the scenes, because we can't decide how they're going to get those things. It, or we shouldn't, because we should let them and their personalities and their abilities dictate
Yeah.
how it gets there.
Yeah. And
you know
usually what happens to me a lot is I actually just sort of I like to turn things over to the players when I present them with the scene, and then I listen to the players just talk it out. And there are so many great details that come out of what the players have to say, and I often just grab
Mhm.
onto those and I use them. Um, what is our epilogue? We would have two epilogues. We would have an epilogue where they stop what happens, and an epilogue where they don't.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, either the epilogue is they're the heroes of a weird city, or they're have to escape the ire of an angry owl god.
Yes,
So,
they're
and
either yeah.
either one of those works great for a one shot. You know, it really does, because it could be, could be a happy ending, could be a to be continued ending.
Yeah, so it could go in both
Yeah.
directions.
And I
Um,
think as a one shot, either way would be satisfying.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, everybody, we didn't quite make our goal. We said that it was going to be 2 hours. It's been 2.5 hours. I think that's okay. This is the first time we've done something like this. I'm very happy with what we got accomplished. I think that for me anyway, I think I have enough to run on to actually create a one-shot adventure out of. I would have liked to get into the ideas of like specific items and things like that and sort of added those into the mix, but maybe we can do that in our next episode. But for tonight, however, I think we're basically finished. I'm going to put up some templates and maybe some links to this document actually itself, not the one that we've written, but the blank that I wrote up. I think it's a pretty good one. So you're free to download and copy that as much as you want and use it change it for your own methods of preparation. If you liked what you saw tonight, and if you had fun, and if you had some laughs, I hope that you will think about liking and subscribing, and maybe even better than that, I hope you'll think of sharing what we did tonight. We do appreciate your viewership, and to Andy and to Lauren and to a few other people who were messaging in the chat. I want to say thank you very much for your contributions. It is nice to have people to bounce ideas off of, and it is good to hear from viewers and members of the audience out there. So for all of you tonight, thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed GMs in the Machine. You can count on us being back. I'm not exactly sure how often I'm going to do this, but it is something to maybe on a monthly basis or maybe a couple times a month. So at any rate, everybody out there have a great game. Stay safe, and we will see you in another episode.